The first session happened on a Tuesday, just as the sun gave up on the valley. I didn't want to do it, but the house didn't give me a choice. The walls began to bleed a cold, thick ink that pooled on the floor, forming a ledger, a massive, ancient book bound in something that felt uncomfortably like human skin. Beside it sat a fountain pen, its nib already wet with that same black, viscous liquid. The entity didn't appear as a person this time. It appeared as a pressure, a crushing weight in the center of the room that forced me to my knees. The air grew so dense I could barely pull a breath into my lungs. It wanted me to record the memories of the cabin before it was abandoned in 1954. Every time I touched the pen, a jolt of ice-cold electricity surged through my arm, forcing my hand to write words I didn't recognize. I wasn't just writing, I was reliving. I felt the heartbreak of a family being forced out at gunpoint. I felt the panic of a secret hidden beneath the floorboards, and the entity watched. I could feel its gaze, a cold, hollow curiosity pressing against my mind, waiting for me to document the agony correctly. If I missed a detail, if I hesitated in my transcription, the room would tilt, sending me crashing against the walls. I spent 4 hours hunched over that ledger, sweating and shivering, while the cabin around me screamed in a language only the dead understand. By the time the pen finally fell from my numb fingers, the ink had dried into permanent, jagged scars on the pages. The entity vanished, leaving me alone in the sudden, ringing silence of the night. But when I looked at the desk, I saw the first invoice. It was neatly printed in the same dark ink, itemizing every second of the terror I had just endured, with a total cost I knew I couldn't pay. If you're still with me, you've just witnessed the start of my debt. Hit that like button and share this story if you want to know what happened when I tried to bind that ledger, and why the ink started following me home. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I left the cabin before dawn. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't even grab my coat. I just ran until the trees thinned and the black asphalt of the main road finally appeared under the morning mist. I felt light, unburdened, convinced that the distance between me and that cabin was enough to break the contract. But the moment I stepped onto the pavement, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but my fingers brushed against something cold, stiff, and slightly damp. I pulled it out. It was a single, yellowing piece of parchment. It was a receipt stamped with today's date. Item, attempted departure. Cost, 4 hours of silence. I stopped walking, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked down at my own hands. The veins under my skin were no longer blue. They were tinted with that same viscous, black ink. It was spreading, tracing the pathways of my own pulse, creeping upward toward my wrists. The debt wasn't tied to the cabin. It was tied to my blood. Everywhere I looked, the world started to stutter. A car passing by on the highway slowed down to a crawl, then began to loop. The same red sedan driving past me 5 times in a row, the driver's face a blurred, featureless mask each time. The reality I knew was unraveling, being replaced by the static of that ledger. I wasn't just a host anymore. I was becoming part of the archive. I realized then that running wasn't just useless, it was the catalyst. The entity didn't want me to escape. It wanted me to bring the debt into the world. Every mile I put between me and the cabin just expanded the radius of its influence. If I was going to end this, I couldn't do it from the safety of the highway. I had to go back to the source, and I had to do it on my own terms. I returned to the cabin at midnight, but I didn't walk through the front door this time. I walked through the kitchen window, shattering the glass and bringing the cold night air with me. The house was waiting. The floorboards were already slick with that black ink, and the air was so heavy with the scent of ozone that my lungs burned with every breath. I didn't come unarmed. I had spent the last 2 hours buying every flare, every strobe light, and every high-intensity flashlight I could find in town. I kicked the main table aside and slammed a high-intensity strobe directly onto the floor, right where the ledger usually manifested. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to negotiate. I wanted to see if this thing could handle the one thing that never existed in 1954, blinding, artificial, relentless light. As the strobe ripped through the darkness, the cabin shrieked. It wasn't a sound of air moving. It was the sound of wood fibers snapping and glass cracking under immense, invisible pressure. The entity began to manifest, not as a face, but as a swirling vortex of shadows, desperately trying to coalesce into a shape I could recognize. I didn't give it the chance. I triggered every flashlight at once, turning the room into a cathedral of white-hot glare. The entity recoiled, the shadows evaporating like steam off a hot pan, but then the house fought back. The walls began to fold inward, the ceiling dropping like a guillotine. It wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It was trying to crush me into the very ink I was trying to destroy. If you are feeling the room go cold right now, don't look away from your screen. The entity is reacting to the fact that I'm telling this story. Like this video and share it immediately to help force this thing back into the dark. Subscribe to the channel right now. I need as many eyes on this as possible to act as a buffer, because if I can't hold this light much longer, I need someone to know exactly where to find what's left of me. The strobe lights were dying, their batteries drained by the sheer density of the shadows, but in that final, flickering second of intensity, the entity stopped fighting. It didn't retreat. It stood perfectly still, and for the first time, the shape coalesced into something solid. It was me, not the doppelganger from before, but me, exactly as I looked in 1954, wearing the same clothes I had on in the photographs I found hidden in the basement floorboards. My heart didn't just stop, it felt like it shattered. The entity wasn't a ghost haunting the house. It was a loop, a fractured, agonizing piece of my own soul that had been trapped in 1954 since the night the cabin burned down. I hadn't been contracted to document the event. I was the one who had started the fire to hide the evidence of what I had done there. Every receipt, every bill, every hour of terror, it wasn't a debt I was paying to a spirit. It was the penance I was forced to relive over and over because I had tried to erase the truth of that night. The ledger on the floor flipped open to the final page, and the ink stopped being viscous. It became blood. My blood. I realized that the only way to break the loop wasn't to fight the darkness, but to accept it. I had to sign the final line. As I reached for the pen, the cabin stopped screaming. The walls froze in mid-collapse, and the silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. I looked at the camera lens, not the one I was recording with, but the reflection of my own eyes in the dark glass. I was no longer the narrator. I was the memory. If you've watched until this moment, you're part of the record now. The story isn't over. It has just been transferred to you. Like this video and share it to pass the weight of the ledger onto someone else, because I am finally, mercifully, fading away. Subscribe if you want to know what happens when the next person opens the door to Blackwood Valley and finds the empty ledger waiting for them.